Good morning and welcome to the final video in my coilover series, in which we're going to talk about rear coilovers. So to start off with, the primary differences we have between the front coilovers and the rear coilovers are the mounting style, in which the rear uses this cup style mount, and also the lack of the parts at the top. Literally the only thing we have at the top is this rubber bushing, but there's no pillow ball, there's no radial bearing, there's nothing like that to worry about up top because the coilover is stationary. It doesn't have to spin or move at all. That's why it's a much simpler design. Now, when it comes to maxing out rear coilovers, there's a few ways this can happen. If your threaded body bottoms all the way in that cup mount, then it is maxed out for the height. Or if your cup or lock rings start running into the spring, then it becomes maxed out in that way. Luckily for the rear, there are a few more ways of alleviating that than you have in the front. So the most common way would be using a lower control arm that incorporates built-in drop. If you don't know what that is and you watch my lower control arm videos, it should give you a good understanding of how that works. And finally, just like we did on the front, you have spring sag and room to run a helper spring if you have room between the top of the lower mount and the bottom of the spring. So I already finished putting together the other rear coilover. I actually ended up running this helper from Broadway right between the spring and the lower mount. And I actually cut a little piece off this lower mount here, about 1/2 inch material off the top of this. This allows more utilization of expansion space for the helper spring, and therefore that was able to let me go 1/2 an inch lower than I would have had been able to if I didn't cut this material off. So if you guys don't understand, cutting off this 1/2 inch of material off the top of this lower mount is basically manipulating the final ride height based on piston depression. So if you don't really understand that concept and you watch the front coilovers video, I think I explain it a little bit better there. Now we're going to start taking apart this coilover. I already got both of these jam collars broken loose, and just like the fronts, we got the clicker to take off. And then we're going to use a 17mm on an impact to go ahead and take this main nut off. Alright, so the clicker is off there. The main nut is off. So when it starts to come apart, you just have a washer right on top here. You have the top hat. Within the top hat, you have the carrier for this rubber bushing, and that is also a spring perch. Then you have the spring isolator, can't forget about these. And then from there, the spring is just able to come off. And then you can go ahead and remove all these lock collars and the lower mount if you wanted to. I guess this is an opportunity to talk about just washers in general. So I don't know if you guys know this, but a washer usually has two different sides to it. One side will be kind of dull and not have as smooth of a finish. That side is actually supposed to go towards the surface of whatever you're fastening. And then the other side is going to be smooth. It'll be a little bit shinier. And that's the side the nut actually goes on. So the concept behind that is when you're torquing out a nut or a fastener onto a washer, this smooth surface allows the fastener to glide more easily over it. And that'll just make the fastener that much more effective. So washers are side dependent, in case you didn't know. Oh, I also forgot, there is also one more washer that goes on the bottom of the top hat. So this one right here, this is the first one that goes on, and then when it's seated, it completely goes against this part of the piston shaft that gets wider there. Everything will go on from there, and that's how you seat the top of the coilover. So we're going to do this one starting with the top, just like we did for the front one. And if any of you care, this is just a coilover boot. So that just goes on the top of the piston shaft assembly to prevent dirt and dust or whatever from getting in there. Here is our naked coilover with the top hat and everything up top already put into place. So now we're going to go ahead and start rebuilding this to what we want, which is going to be the setup with the helper spring. Alright, it is reassembly time. So we have spring isolator, main spring, spring isolator, spring spacer to go between the main spring and the helper spring, another spring isolator, the helper spring, another spring isolator, this is our last one, and now we can put on our spring perch. So I talked about it in my front coilovers video, but you're able to delete these lock collar rings as long as the purposes they were originally intended for are fulfilled. So we have our spring perch collar on here, and then what we're going to do is put on our lower mount from there, and this collar is going to act not only as a spring perch, but it's also going to be our jam collar for the lower mount. So therefore you don't need a separate jam collar for this, and you don't need a separate jam collar for the lower mount. So one spring collar as the spring perch is going to be able to fulfill all the purposes that we're looking for.
I don't think people understand.
Don't forget to put the clicker back on. So the lower mount is fully threaded and bottomed into the cup. You can see it a little bit there. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and take this spring perch collar. We're going to thread it downwards, jam it up against the lower mount so everything is locked in place and good to go. And then I just got this breaker bar here to hold the lower mount in place so that it doesn't spin as I put the final torque onto this ring.